This is Josh White with JW Math Tutoring, and today's video is going to go through the May 2023 SAT QAS, specifically Section 3, the No Calculator Math section. So let's go ahead and get started.
But life is a dream that calculus could never predict.
All right, just before I begin, the May 2023 SAT QAS Section 3, the no calculator portion, just want to mention a couple things. First, most importantly, this video will most likely go past the allotted time for the section of 25 minutes, and that's because I like to show as many methods as possible to solve some of these problems. So I might show 2 or even 3 different ways that you could solve some of these problems, which would obviously take me past the allotted amount of time. And the second thing, of course, if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And of course, subscribe to my channel and sign up for notifications as well. All right, so starting off with problem number 1. Here we have a graph with some points on it. And it basically just says, okay, so if the student enrolls in 8 3-credit classes, so notice that would be basically the point right here, that corresponds to 8 on the x-axis. How many 4-credit classes will a student need? Okay, well, so this point right here, what is its value on the y-axis? That's basically what it's asking for. It's halfway between 10 and 8, so the answer is just letter C, 9. Next, below it for number 2, here we have a graph of a line, and they just want to know what the equation is. So there's multiple ways we could do this. First of all, I would notice that the y-intercept or b value is right here at positive 1. So since that is the case, I would go ahead and I would eliminate answer choices B and D because they have y-intercepts of -1. Notice these are all in the format, y equals mx plus b. So get rid of that and get rid of that. And now this line has a positive slope, so by process of elimination, it has to be A, okay? Because C has a negative slope, which would mean it was going downhill, like that. So you could also, count the slope out just to verify or confirm. You start here, you go up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1. So that would be, 1 on top for the up, positive 1 on bottom for the right. So 1 over 1, which is just 1 for the slope. But technically, you don't need to figure that out. So again, correct answer is A. Now for number 3, back at the top of the page, we have a polynomial function. We know its x-intercepts, and it's asked for which statement must be true here. So notice these points, you have an x-coordinate, comma, y-coordinate. So all of these answers here are basically of the form, f of x equals some number. So what are you plugging in for x? Well, it's either -6 or +6, either one. And then what is your output that corresponds to that for y? Well, that's just 0. So it's going to be answer A here. F of -6 is equal to 0 is the only statement that's true. Now, for number 4, here you have a system of linear equations. This could be solved multiple ways. You could move everything in the top one over to one side. You could do elimination. But the way it's set up, it's actually probably easier to do using substitution because you can just take the second equation and just plug in directly for y what it's equal to from the first equation, which is the 4x plus 6. And then go ahead and now we can solve this equation for x. So we can distribute this minus, to both terms. So it's going to be -5x minus 4x, which is -9x, and then -1 times 6, which is -6. And we just go ahead and finish solving this out. We get -9x equals 27. X is going to equal -3. So notice, process of elimination, the correct answer has to be A. All right, there's no other answers that have -3 as the x value, so we don't even need to bother technically solving for y. We don't need to spend time on that. One other thing to point out too, technically you could go through the answers and you could back solve this, meaning you could plug in like the x and the y values to both equations and see which answer choice works. But because this is no calculator, so you'd have to do it all in your head or by hand, and like there's an answer choice here that deals with fractions, I probably wouldn't recommend that. But that is always a possible option for you when you have a system of equations and you're given, the answer choices. All right, number 5. So this is an absolute value equation, and most absolute value equations have two solutions. However, this one is only going to have one, and the reason is because it's like when you set up the two equations, so the first one is just like the original problem minus the absolute value signs. The second one, what you do is you write the left side, no absolute value signs, but you put a negative on the right side. But the problem is, like, making zero negative doesn't actually do anything. It's still zero. I mean, there's no, in other words, it's not like a number, it's not like a number other than zero where you'd have, say, 5 and -5 or 2 and -2. So the second equation's not going to give us a second answer. Okay, so we're only going to get one answer. We're just going to add 10 to both sides. We're just going to get x equals 10, and that's it. Now, again, this one, it's an equation. You could back solve this. You could take the answers, you could plug them in. Answer choice A, -10 minus 10, -20. Is the absolute value of that equal to 0? No. B, 0 minus 10, -10. Absolute value of that, is that equal to 0? No, and so on and so forth. And then once you got to C and you saw that it worked, you would technically, I mean, I guess you would actually be able to eliminate D right away, because if you checked A and saw -10 didn't work, you could just cross that one out as well. Moving on to the next page now. Problem number 6 at the top here. This is just basically a formula, and they want you to solve this formula um, for R in terms of QAS. So easiest way to do this is just to first divide by S on both sides, and then what you're going to do is just square root both sides. That'll get rid of the squared, and that would leave um, just the R by itself, not like trapped in a parentheses like it is right now. So we square root both sides, and we get square root of Q over S equals now R minus 1. I mean, technically, you would put a plus or minus here in the formula. And then last step would just be to add 1. So you would add 1 to this, and you could put the 1 out front, because notice all the answer choices have the root term second and the other term, first. So a couple things. Both the Q and the S are under the square root. So that would eliminate B and D kind of right off the bat. And also we have the positive 1 out front, so therefore it has to be answer choice A. Okay, and that's it. We're just rearranging this formula to solve it in terms of R. Below that, number 7, we have another question related to basically lines, linear functions, whatever you want to call them. So it tells us for each increase in x, it decreases the value of y by 2. So if you think about that in terms of the slope, right, it's like change in y over change in x. So my change in y is a decrease of 2 or minus 2. My change in x is an increase of 1 or positive 1. That means the slope of this line is going to be negative 2. So right off the bat, those are both gone, and we're now down to C and D. And they also tell us when x is 0, y is 5. Well, that just means that B, or the y-intercept, is 5, specifically positive 5. Therefore, correct answer is going to be letter D. All right, and nothing more that we need to do. Now, back at the top of the page, problem 8, we have a quadratic function, parabola, and it's given in this formula, which is kind of like intercept form. I mean, not really, because normally intercept form is just like x minus p times x minus q, and I guess you could have the a out front and whatever. Here there's a k, which is a number on the bottom, but anyways, um, they want to know what is the value of k going to be here. So this might look like a difficult problem, but it actually is not, because all we have to do is pick a point which is on the parabola, which I'm going to choose the vertex here, which is 4, 8. So I'm going to plug in 8 for my y, and then I'm going to plug in 4 for x in each place that I see it, and then I'm just going to solve this formula for k. So I would first probably simplify this and do 4 minus 8, which is negative 4, and then I would do negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. And at this point, you can probably just look at this and figure out that the correct answer is going to be B, that k has to equal 2, because 16 divided by 2 is what equals 8. But if you weren't sure, you could cross multiply it and get 8k equals 16, and then just divide by 8. Okay, and you get k equals 2. So correct answer for this one is going to be letter B. Now below that, for number 9, we have an isosceles right triangle. That technically means we have a 45, 45, 90 right triangle, because both our legs are congruent. We know the hypotenuse is 4. What is the perimeter in inches? So we need to find the length of these legs, and it's going to be the same value. So there's two ways you could do this. First, if you remember the properties of right triangles, specifically 45, 45, 90s, the scale factor between the hypotenuse and the legs is basically root 2. And since we have the hypotenuse and we're going to the legs, we're going to divide by root 2. So the legs, which I'm just going to call x, would be 4 divided by root 2. Now to simplify that, you would multiply by root 2 over itself. So we get 4 root 2 over, now on the bottom, square root 2 times square root 2 is square root 4, but that just simplifies to 2. The whole reason is to get rid of the radical. And now you could simplify to 2 goes into 4 2 times. So finally we get 2 root 2. I'll show an alternate way how you could have gotten these just after I'm done with this. So what's the perimeter now? 2 root 2 plus 2 root 2 plus 4. So that should be 4 root 2. We combine the outer parts, but we don't touch the radical. It's just like if you were adding variables, 2x plus 2x is 4x. It doesn't become 4x squared or something else. Okay, plus 4. So it looks like correct answer is going to be letter C right here. Now, an alternate way that you could get the length of these legs, if you did not remember the special right triangle relationships, is since this is a 45, 45, 90, and each of these would be the same, you could say Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus x squared, i.e. a squared plus b squared, equals c squared, or in this case, 4 squared. So 2x squared is going to equal 16, x squared is going to equal 8, x equals the square root of 8, and then you would just simplify that to 2 root 2. And then you would do the same exact process I just did where you add up 2 root 2 plus 2 root 2 plus 4. Get the same exact answer. So you could also use Pythagorean theorem if you did not remember the 45, 45, 90 special right triangle formulas. Moving on to the next page, number 10. How many solutions does this equation have? So notice if you distribute the left side, you get 4x minus 8. If you multiply out the right side, you get negative 2x minus 8. So notice the x terms do not cancel, do not drop out, okay? That's what happens when you have either a zero solution, which is no solution, or an infinitely many solution, like all real numbers case, okay? When you have that, again, the x terms will cancel out or drop out. That does not happen here. So the answer is going to be B, exactly 1. You're never going to get, by the way, for a linear equation like this, you're never going to get exactly 2 solutions, just not possible. But just to prove it, you could go ahead and you could finish solving it, and you get, 6x minus 8 equals negative 8. And then if you add 8 to both sides, you just get 6x equals 0 or x equals 0, just dividing by 6. So there's exactly one solution, but you don't need to solve it out if you already recognize here that since the x terms are different, it will have a solution. All right, number 11. This is a topic that's been seen on several SAT exams recently. So what you have to know is that, first of all, if you draw the radius of the circle here from the center to the point of tangency, it will be perpendicular to this tangent line K. So because what that tells us is that the slope of line K will be perpendicular to CA, and therefore their slopes will be opposite reciprocals. So the slope from A to C, or C to A, however you want to count it, so it's going to be I'm going to start at C, negative 4 minus negative 5, subtracting the y's on top, and then for the x's, negative 5 minus negative 7. So that ultimately gives me, let's see, -4 plus 5 is 1, -5 plus 7 is 2, a positive slope of 1/2. So that is the slope of CA. And now I need the opposite reciprocal of that. So I flip it, I put the 2 on top, 1 on bottom, and I make it negative since the original slope value is positive. So the correct answer for A is going to be -2. Now for 18, not 18, 12, directly below this, here we have an exponential function, and they're basically asking in it, this is like an interpretation question about it. So they give you this like whatever this long function with a bunch of numbers in it, blah blah blah. Okay, and T is the number of years the players participated in tournaments. Okay, and we want to know which following represents the rating of someone who just entered their first professional tournament. So if someone has just entered the first professional tournament, that means the time they have spent participating in professional tournaments is basically none or non-existent. So in other words, T equals 0. So therefore, you would be plugging in 0 for t. So the correct answer for this is just going to be letter B. It's R of 0. Like C would tell you the predicted rating for someone who has been playing chess professionally for 790 years. Doesn't even make sense. And same thing with D, 1830 years. And like A, it's a negative number of years. That again doesn't make sense because time you only think of as positive. So correct answer is B. All right, for number 13 now, back at the top of the page. Um, this one is one of the most difficult problems in the test only because of the arithmetic involved. The actual understanding on it is not particularly difficult, but the fact that you have to do it without a calculator is what makes it challenging. So, okay, it was like 60 minutes on trial one. Okay, and the time to complete it will decrease by 10% for each additional trial. So basically just multiply each of these things by 0.1 and then subtract it. So in other words, 60, move the decimal over one place or times 0.1, however you want to look at it, is just going to be 6.0 or 6. So you take that away. So that means for trial 2, it's going to be 54 minutes. And then we go through the process again. We subtract by 5.4. And you can do some kind of like estimation here if you don't want to figure out the exact values. But I'll just tell you it's going to be 48.6 for trial 3. Now for trial 4, it's going to be minus technically 4.86, but I'm just going to round it to like 4.9. So that way, it's just a little easier to do the calculations in my head. So if we do that, basically now it's going to come out to roughly like 43.7, somewhere in that ballpark. Because you think about it, subtract you, or you could actually round it up to 5 to make it even easier, and then it would be just 43.6. And now for the fifth trial, you're going to subtract 4.37, or I'm going to round it to 4.4. So that's going to be like zero point 0.3, and this is going to be 39. So how many minutes will it take? It's going to be C 39. And again, the key to this one is to like round your values you're subtracting to easy numbers. Okay, so you can do it in your head and don't spend too much time on it. All right, next up, question number 14. Here we have a system of linear inequalities, and they want to know which of these is the solutions to it. So again, this one's kind of a pain because technically you have to check both of them, or not both of them. You have to check like multiple points because there is some overlap between some of the points here among the different answer choices. So I'll just tell you the correct answer is going to be D. Basically, if you go ahead and you plug in the values, for each of these x's. So like for the first one, it's going to be 2 less than 2/5 times 2 plus 3. Excuse me, -2. So 2 less than -4/5 plus 3. So 3 minus 4/5 is going to be more than 2, and so it's going to be greater than the 2 that's on the left, so that checks out. And then you would technically have to check it also in the second one. So you would have 2 greater than 1/2 times -2 minus 6. Well, 2 greater than, this would be -7 overall. So it checks in both. Then you could do the same thing for the second point, 0, -3. You're going to get -3 greater than 2/5 times 0 plus 3. -3 less than 0 plus 3. Okay, that's true. Check it for the second one. -3 greater than 1/2 times 0 minus 6 is -3 greater than -6. Yes. And then you could do the same thing for 4, comma 3, and you'll find that D is going to work. So it's a little bit of work. It's arithmetic kind of calculations plugging in basically without a calculator, which is annoying, but that's basically I think the easiest way to do it. You could also technically graph these out, like make a graph and then graph the top one, graph the bottom one, do the shading, and then like match up the points and see which ones actually fall within the shading. But I think it's going to be easier, quicker, possibly to use uh, this method of plugging in. Up the next page, we have problem number 15. This one deals with some radicals. Um, and the easiest way to do this one is actually to convert them to rational exponents, because that's how you can combine them into a single radical. So what I would do is I would take the first square root, which is 32, and I would write that as 2 to the 5th. And then technically the square root of that is the same as raising it to the 1/2 power. So we end up really with just the first radical being 2 to the 5/2. Then you can do the same thing with 64, which is 2 to the 6th. Now this is technically a fifth root, which means it's going to be 2 to the 6th to the 1/5 power. Because when you go from a radical to a rational exponent, like the index, which in this case is 5, is the denominator of your fractional exponent. And basically the 6 is really what's going to be on top. So in other words, it's going to be 2 to the 6/5. So we have 2 to the 5/2 times 2 to the 6/5. We multiply those together. We add the exponents. So when you add 5/2 plus 6/5, you have to get a common denominator of 10. So it's going to be 25 over 10 plus 12 over 10, which is going to be 37 over 10. So you get 2 to the 37 over 10. Now, to go ahead and simplify this, basically it's like the 10th root of 2 to the 37th power. Notice that is not any of our answer choices. However, right off the bat, we can eliminate A and C, because notice those have 7th roots in them, but we actually have a 10th root. So it's going to be between B and D. So now the question is, well, how do you simplify 2 to the 37th? So basically the rule of thumb, the way I usually teach students to like simplify when you have radicals like this is take the index, you divide it into the power. The number of times it goes in, which in this case would be 3, that's how many of the bases, which in this case is 2, that's how many 2's end up outside. And then the remainder, which in this case is 7, is how many 2's remain inside. So in other words, to simplify 2 to the 37th, like you need 10 2's to come outside as 1. And you have 3 groups of those, 10, 20, 30. So outside, you're going to have basically 2 to the 3rd, which is going to end up being 8. And inside, you're left with the remainder, which is 2 to the 7th. So this is going to be 8 10th root, should put a 10 down here, of 2 to the 7th. Correct answer is going to be letter D. And really, you only need to know what the outside part is, because the inside parts are the same in them. They both have, 2 to the 7th under the radical. All right, next up, number 16. Here we have another line problem, talking about parallel lines in this one. So it just wants to know what the slope of this line is. So this is a very simple, basic, easy problem, as we're now starting the student-produced responses or the grid ends. So notice for your slope, you can just count. We go up 1, and then we go right 5. So the positive one goes on top, positive 5 to the right goes on the bottom. So the slope of this is just 1/5. You could also input the answer as just 0.2. So either of these would be acceptable, but they would be what you fill in. Below that, for number 17, here you have a rational expression, and it says it's equivalent to cx to the d, where c and d are constants. What's the value of c plus d? So all this basically saying is here is when you simplify this, like what does the value of c end up being? What does the value of d end up being? That's all it's asking for. So you just say 4 goes into 32 8 times, and x to the 6th over x to the 3rd, well, 6 minus 3 is 3. So this becomes 8x to the 3rd. Therefore, c is 8 and d is 3. So what do we get when we add them together? Well, 8 plus 3 is just 11. So correct answer is just going to be 11. That's what you're going to fill in. Back to the top of the page for number 18. This is a linear equation, kind of a pain because you have a bunch of decimals here, but still it's not that difficult to solve. So first I'm going to distribute the left side, 2 plus 1h plus, just think of it as 3 times 21, but except there's a decimal, which is 6.3. On the right side, 3h plus 2.1. Also notice if before you want to multiply, if you distribute, if you wanted to multiply both sides by 10, which is what I'm going to do now to get rid of the decimals, you could do that as well if that's easier to work with. So now I'm just going to multiply both sides by 10, and that's just going to turn it into whole numbers. So 21h plus 63 equals 30h plus 21. So now go ahead and just get the h's on one side, get the numbers on the other side. Okay, you end up with 42 divided by 9, but technically you cannot put that as an answer because it would need to be simplified. So your acceptable answer choices here are going to be 14 over 3. Basically, you can reduce the top and the bottom each by 3. Or you can put the decimal or numerical decimal equivalent, which would be 4.66. That's if you truncate the decimal. If you round it, you could put 4.67. So either of these three options would be acceptable, but this is the correct answer or solution, to this problem. Now for number 19, here we have one involving basically a cylinder and a sphere, and their volumes are related to each other, except one is half the volume of the other. So you have to figure out, okay, what's the radius going to be for both of them, same value, for this to be true. So first, make sure you know the formulas. So for a sphere, it is 4/3 pi r cubed. So this is the volume of, again, a sphere. And then for a cylinder, it's just going to be pi r squared h. Volume cylinder. Okay. Now, notice again, they tell us that the volume of the sphere is half volume of cylinder. So that means the 1/2 here will go on the right side. In other words, volume of sphere is equal sign 1/2 of multiplication volume of cylinder. So sphere equals half volume of cylinder. Now we can also plug in the 16 for the height that's given to us. And what I would probably do next is just a couple things here. So first, okay, 2 and 16 cancel out. That's going to give us 8 on the right side. Also, the pi's can be canceled out. You could just divide both sides by pi, but because they're both on the same side and their number, we can just cancel them. Okay, so on the right, we have 8r squared. On the left, we have 4/3 r cubed. At this point, multiple ways you could do this. I would probably, honestly, also multiply both sides by 3, and I would turn this into 4r cubed. Just get rid of the fractions equals 24r squared. Now to solve this, there are technically two different ways you could do it. You could divide by r squared on both sides, Typically, you cannot divide by a variable on both sides of an equation, but on this one you can, because we already know that r is not equal to 0. The reason you generally cannot divide by a variable on both sides is because you don't know what the value of the variable you're solving for is, so there's a possibility it could be equal to 0. So technically, you could divide like this, and you would get 4r equals 24 or r equals 6, and that is the correct final answer. But most people probably aren't used to that, so what you would probably do instead is now you would subtract 24r squared over to the other side, because normally with a polynomial equation you get it equal to 0, and then you would factor out 4r squared, and you would get r minus 6. And then you could go ahead and technically the way you would solve this is you would set both factors equal to 0, but 4r squared equal to 0, it's just going to give you 0. And we already know it can't be 0 because it tells us in the problem it's greater than 0. So then you would take the r minus 6 factor and set that equal to 0, and you get just r equals 6, same answer we got before. So two different ways you could solve it at the end, but the correct answer is going to be positive 6. Now for the last one, problem number 20 here. This problem, you basically have a quadratic equation, and you're given some information which is actually part of the quadratic formula, and they want to figure out what x is. So, okay, the easiest way to do this is to think about this. Okay, here's the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what's happening here is they are, first of all, for A, we're plugging in just 1, okay? So first of all, just think about that. So 4AC is just minus 4C because A is 1. Same thing on the bottom. Now, what they're telling us is that the negative b plus the root part is equal to 18. So one answer is going to be like this whole, replace the whole entire top part with 18 and put it over 2. And then the other answer is replacing the minus part, the negative b minus, the square root um, part with 10, and again, put that over 2. And then you just simplify those, and your answers are going to be 9 or 5. So you could put in either answer. You could put in 9, you could put in 5. It doesn't matter. Either one's correct, but that's all you're doing from this problem. So the actual amount of work needed for this is not very much, but it is tricky to figure out exactly, what you're supposed to do with these expressions that they give you the numerical values for. So that was section 3, the no calculator section from the May 2023 QAS. If you have any questions about it, do feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, be on the lookout for the calculator section of this test. And also, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and sign up for notifications as well. Otherwise, I'll see you back here soon with another ACT or SAT related math video.